Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. I want to give a shout-out to all of our sponsors who've made this possible. I'm wearing my Cole Roofing hat. I'm drinking my Royal Farms out of my Cole Roofing mug. Speaking of Royal Farms, by the way, my wife picked up an 8-piece, brought it home on Sunday morning. It comes in the plastic bags now, Luke. You know, it lets the air out of it. It aerates a little bit. So we heated the oven up right around 12:30, 12:45. And honestly, if you noticed, I didn't tweet a whole lot on the first drive or two. My fingers. I was eating fried chicken, and I didn't get the tenders, you know, like you usually tell me to do. So I was eating chicken at 1:05. And as it turned out, once I cleaned my hands up, there wasn't much to talk about other than the defense. And look, for the Lamar thing, and we'll talk about this, the offense was, pedestrian. And defenses have caught up a little bit. We'll see what Jimmy Schwartz is going to throw at him this week up in Philadelphia. But what we saw happen to the Falcons and everybody getting fired and 0-5, the city of New York is 0-10, right? Dak Prescott, I can't even begin there and what that means for the Cowboys and Andy Dalton and whatever else. But around these parts, it's a week where, we'll scratch our heads at Lamar a little bit and praise the defense around here, right?
Yeah, I mean, you come up for air, and I challenge and kind of encourage everyone to do that every few weeks at least, and kind of take a look around the league, and you realize things look pretty darn good for the Ravens still. They haven't been perfect, and they certainly have some areas they need to work on, but to your point, you talk about some of these teams. I mean, Dan Quinn, a Salisbury guy, tough to see, but not exactly surprising. A lot of people thought he'd be dismissed after last season. And the Falcons, that Super Bowl and that 28-3 lead wasn't that long ago, but it feels a long time ago when you consider what's transpired there since then. You look and you see the Ravens, they have the best point differential in the league, going into Monday Night Football action. And I mean, things have been, they're still really good. And I understand that there's frustration about the Kansas City game. And by the way, the Chiefs lost on Sunday at home to the Raiders. So let's keep that in perspective as well. But, look, I see the same things that others are seeing with this offense right now. And I'm seeing a lack of offensive identity. I'm seeing at times, puzzling and mystifying reluctance to run the football, despite the fact that the numbers still look pretty darn good in that department when they do run it. I'm seeing a Lamar Jackson that hasn't been the guy he was a year ago, but I'll continue to come back to this offense being a victim of its own success last year. I mean, what happened last year is the version of Ted Williams hitting 400. You're not going to do that every year. And when you do look at the offense, and I know not all of the numbers are real shiny, but there's still a team that's fitting the profile of a top 10 offense in many categories. And you look at Lamar Jackson, and it's kind of funny to think about this. I was looking at his numbers late Sunday night as I was kind of planning out what I was going to write about the offense over the next couple of days. I wrote about the defense late Sunday night. You can check that out at WNST.net and BaltimorePositive.com. But you look at Lamar's numbers for the season, and you think back to where he was 2 years ago, or even the beginning of last season. He's completing 63.7% of his passes. He's thrown 9 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He has a 100.5 passer rating. Now, those numbers aren't what they were in 2019, but they're still really, really good. And they're still in that top 10 quarterback kind of category. And I know people will say, well, Luke, he only has 949 passing yards, but he didn't throw for 5,000 yards last year. We know this offense, this passing game's about efficiency.
Well, he better never pass for 5,000 yards, right? Literally.
I mean, if he does, then either the Ravens are not good on the other side of the ball and they're trailing a ton and he's getting a lot of practice coming back from 2 or 3 score deficits, or he's transformed his game so much from what we've seen over the first 3 years of his career until becoming Russell Wilson, so to speak, or becoming more Patrick Mahomes like. But you're right. You wouldn't expect to see that. But I just think it's important to recognize, I see some of the issues they're having, but let's also keep in mind, no Marshall Yanda. And we've talked about the Hayden Hurst trade. Not that that was necessarily a bad decision, but it does change the makeup of your team. They've gone from less of a 12 personnel, two tight end team, two tight end set offense to more 11 personnel. But the problem with that, when you have three wide receivers on the field, is you need to find guys that can catch the ball consistently, other than Marquise Brown. So I see issues. I'm not trying to forgive those things. I'm just trying to look at this with a pragmatic stance of they they were going to have some regression from last year. Let's see if some of the issues they're trying to work through right now will result in them evolving. We've talked about it a lot. We said all season, from the time they lost that Tennessee game, they've got to figure out ways to play off schedule. They've got to figure out ways to be able to throw the ball when they need to throw the ball. Well, they don't have those two score deficits very often. So maybe you do need to work on those things a little bit as the season goes on. And guess what? When you're working on some things, they might look choppy. And that's what we're seeing right now. I mean, it's not as though this offense has been inept. You still look at the numbers for this offense compared to virtually any in Ravens history, and it still looks really darn good. But when you have a historic offense in 2019, and now you compare this group to that standard that's been created, yeah, it's going to leave something to be desired. But this is a group that we said all along had to evolve, right? So maybe this is just part of that process in trying to figure out how to become a little more of a passing team in those situations when they need them. And I know people just want to say, run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. And look, I've asked those questions at times, certainly on Sunday when you had a quarterback who, even though Lamar said he was all right and the knee wasn't an issue, the fact that he ran twice indicates it was probably an issue, and certainly something they wanted to protect him with. So those are the opportunities then that maybe you do some things that you wouldn't do under normal circumstances to try to figure this thing out. And again, I don't know that for sure. Coaches aren't going to say that, because then that would imply that you're not taking a game as fully seriously as you should, because it's the NFL and any given Sunday, yada yada yada. But you do wonder if there's something to that, as this team's trying to not reinvent itself, but evolve, to grow. We said all last year after they lost to Tennessee or when they play Kansas City that just running the ball, running the ball, running the ball is great, but what happens when you fall behind? Well, maybe they're working on that, and maybe that's what we can chalk up some of these growing pains to. I'm not
Well, when
forgiving
you win
that, but
45-6 every week, you don't have to learn anything else, right? Like this year, every week's a little bit of a minefield. And don't think for a minute that Schwartz isn't going to have something up his sleeve, and then you're going to get a week off, and then Mike Tomlin's group's going to be, waiting for you, and you're sort of the hunted when you're 14-2. And the Bengals spent. Look, I did 5 pieces last week with the 5 smartest people
yeah,
in Cincinnati. Every single one of them said that the broken ankle play last year really affected the Bengals. It affected their all season. It affected how Duke Tobin thought about them, and everything they thought about draft-wise. And all the money they spent was to neutralize Lamar Jackson, right? Like to make sure that wouldn't happen again, that the Ravens aren't going to come in and run for 285 yards on them, right? And, they just got beat a different way on Sunday. They got beat 27-3 after trying for a year to figure out Lamar, and they figure out Lamar, and the defense comes out there and punches their number 1 overall pick in the mouth all day long.
right. And I mean, the point you just made is spot on. They're going to get everyone's best effort now. I mean, last year, the revolution, and we saw it certainly late in 2018 when the Ravens basically changed their identity overnight. They go from Joe Flacco and that offense to what they were doing with Lamar, and totally different, zigging while everyone else zags, right? We talked about how embracing the weirdness. Well, when teams have seen it now for a year and a half, coming up close on 2 years, if you want to count the last 7 games of 2018, it's not as weird anymore. And that's not to say it's not, it isn't still going against the grain of what we see from most offenses, but there's more familiarity. I've used the example, even though it doesn't hold as much weight because so many pitchers throw 100 miles per hour now, but I use the example that the Ravens offense was kind of like that pitcher who throws 100, who just completely blows through the league the first time around and just overwhelms the opposition. Well, what happens as the opposition sees that pitcher a little bit more? They start to figure it out a little bit more. That doesn't mean the pitcher's done, but it does mean that he has to start relying on his secondary stuff a little bit. And I think that's going on a little bit for the Ravens right now. I mean, it's simplistic. And as I mentioned, we're talking about some different personnel, and you're replacing a Hall of Famer at right guard. And by the way, the guy that replaced him didn't play on Sunday, so they had two other guys there. That matters. That's going to make a difference. That's going to impact your running game. And
Yeah, I hope Marshall Yanda had a good day on Sunday. I hope he's having fun.
yeah, it's going to cause some. It doesn't mean you're doomed, but it does mean you have to adjust. It does mean you have to evolve a little bit and grow a little bit. And I think that's where Lamar and this offense is right now. And that's, by the way, that's not to say that they're guaranteed to figure it all out either. I'm not just going to brush past it and say, oh, this is no big deal. They know they need to be better, and you could see that on the sideline. I mean, Mark Andrews or Lamar Jackson coming off the field on a number of those drives, especially in the second half. You could see that there was some frustration that they weren't able to sustain drives the way that they're used to doing. I mean, you look at how they performed in the first quarter, and then that first play of the second quarter, the touchdown to Marquise Brown, that touchdown, field goal touchdown. I mean, or I guess it was field goal touchdown touchdown. I mean, it's that looked really good. The first quarter looked more what you'd expect, and then it kind of went away. And that's what we're seeing. It's not as though this has been a bad offense from start to finish by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, that would be disingenuous to categorize it that way, but it's just been more disjointed. We haven't seen that boat race from start to finish that we saw so many different times last year, where we were joking that Sam Cook wasn't even on the field that day.
Well, the thing
We
that
just
I
haven't seen those
love,
performances.
that I loved about those teams, the last 2 years, and I wrote at length about this, was 2nd and 3, 2nd and 2, 2nd and 1. And that's happening when Lamar's taking knees to the helmet, diving forward, diving right, diving left. Whatever that was on Sunday was the version of Lamar didn't practice this week. We're worried about his leg. We don't want him diving left and right. We can still win 27-3 without having to run him into traffic and into linebackers for a week or maybe 2 weeks this week, as they'll have 2 weeks off, right, before they have to play Pittsburgh. They'll get 13 days down this week. So part of this is managing this special talent that they have, whose instinct is to run into linebackers. I mean, we've seen that, right? They're trying to coach that out of him a little bit. And you don't want him, we talked about that. You don't want him to coach him out of it too much.
Right.
But what we saw on Sunday, I don't know that that's sustainable, him running 2 times a week, that they're going to be able to win 27-3 that way, because the defense is just going to be that smash mouth. But if the defense leads the dance for a little while here in a franchise where the defense has led the dance for, 2 decades, literally, right? That wouldn't be such a bad thing either, because the notion that the football I love, the 2nd and 1 and 2nd and 2 and 2nd and 3, probably takes a little bit more of Lamar running than twice a game, probably more like 12 to 15 times a game. And that magic backfield, that three-headed monster, figuring that part of the running game out is something they're going to need to do as the Leafs change.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's no question about that. And I do want to say this. I mean, we've talked a lot about need to run the ball more, need to run the ball more, need to run the ball more. If you do look at how it's playing out, they're not having as much success between the tackles as they did last year. I mean, even look at their rushing totals on Sunday, and you could say, well, you look at the final numbers, they average 6.7 yards per carry. And
so that's the reason they're not in 2nd and 2, because they're not getting 8 yards on first down anymore.
Right.
Literally.
But, I mean, you look at it and you say 161 yards on 24 carries, 42 came on Duvernay's end around, and they had a 34-yard run from Dobbins. Now, those plays, you want those plays, and part of the argument can be that you continue to run the ball because you're going to get those chunk plays eventually. But my point is, with that's 76 yards out of their 161. Well, their other 22 carries, and one of those was an RG3 kneel down, so I don't want to put anything into that. But it does speak to not consistently, to what you just said, not consistently getting 7 or 8 yards a pop. It's been more so 2, 3, 4. Then they're getting a big chunk play. But that right there, that formula is going to lead to a little more choppiness than what we saw last year, where it was just steady, moving down the field, play action, pop. I mean, and then before you know it, it's a six-minute drive and it's a touchdown. We're just not seeing quite as much of that. As I've said, they've kind of cycled between being that and then being disjointed much more than we were used to seeing last year. And I still think these are things that are, uh, I don't even know if fixable is the right term, because I don't think their offense is broken per se, but it's not as well calibrated as it was a year ago. And as I've said over and over, it's possible that it might not get to that same level. But to what you just said a few minutes ago, if you have a defense that is capable of winning a game in the way that they did on Sunday, understanding that no, the Cincinnati Bengals aren't the Kansas City Chiefs, but they're still a team that had scored some points and done some nice things against some other teams over the last few weeks. If you can win different ways, that's what you want, because you might have a week where Lamar Jackson's sick or his knee's a little bit sore, or you might have a week where a couple guys are missing from your offensive line. And on the flip side, inevitably, at some point this year, the defense is going to have some guys missing, and they're not going to be as good. They were pretty darn poor against Kansas City. Let's call a spade a spade. In that situation, you wanted your offense to step up, and they didn't do that against Kansas City. But there are 11 games left in the regular season, and that journey, that path to trying to get to that point is ongoing. So what you saw on Sunday, it's not going to draw a lot of attention around the league. Beating Cincinnati, I mean, people are just going to shrug their shoulders. I mean, I've already gotten the comments on Twitter, posting what I wrote about the defense, and people were saying, well, they didn't look that way against Kansas City, where it's like, well, I understand that, but they're not playing Kansas City again until January. So you play the opponent that's presented to you every week, and you do the best you can to win that football game. And well, the Ravens are 4-1 despite some of the hand wringing that we've seen here locally.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke. He'll be out in Owings Mills all week long, getting you ready for Ravens and Eagles. I will be in Philadelphia on Sunday for Ravens and Eagles. Be monitoring the American League National League Championship Series, as well as doffing our caps to the Lakers and LeBron and the bubble. And first things first, we're merging the sites, WNST.net and Baltimore Positive. I've got the new hat out, and I got the new gear coming for Luke, and the leaves are changing. But if you've been a WNST.net visitor for the past 2.5 decades, the new website will take you to Baltimore Positive. It's not a mistake. You'll see all of our work there in color and in vibrancy and in new ways with all of our newest sponsors. I'm wearing my Liberty Pure shirt here. I just want to say a shout out to Doug Workman and the group over there. 1-800-CLEAN-WATER. I asked Doug what they do. Residential plumbing, boiler services, water analysis, anything to do with water, water treatment, delivery, fresh water, clean water, well water. Call Liberty Pure for your free water analysis. They treat the water at the Ravens facility as well. They can treat your water, acleanwater.com. I'm going to have Doug on. I'm going to reach out to Matt Stover, who's also associated with the folks at the Liberty Pure, and get Matt on talking some kicking. Blondell Miller-Schuler, Todd Schuler, joins us each and every week talking about life in the county. He was a former county delegate who's a personal injury and workers' compensation lawyer, along with one of my lifelong pals, Mark Miller, down in Essex. You can find them at damngoodlawyer.com, damngoodlawyer.com. No fees unless they win. Reach them for a free case evaluation, 410-687-7878. Looking forward to talking to Todd about the victory this week over the Cincinnati Bengals. Also, Raskin Global. Leonard Raskin will be here, empowering people to choose their financial future for over 33 years. Let them make your dream, your American dream, your reality. Find them at RaskinGlobal.com. Every time I talk to Leonard, I learn stuff. He also has a spot out on the new BaltimorePositive.com. We've built this for our readers, our users, our listeners, our sports fans, our not stick to sports people, people that want to make the world a better place, and people in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and beyond who are going to vote. So I'm encouraging everyone to get your official ballot. Make sure that you're taking care of your American right to vote this week. Very, very important. Luke, we've talked about COVID and its effects on society. Lord knows we had Nancy Pelosi on last week. We had Dutch Ruppersberger. I went down to the district and talked to a bunch of people on Capitol Hill. You can find all that out, and the politics and the news and the education part of Baltimore Positive. But the education on COVID and the National Football League, I just congratulated the NBA. We can congratulate the NHL. They lived in bubbles. They moved to Edmonton. Baseball's going to move to Arlington next week, right? Like, all of this is going on. And football is having, every day you wake up and you're just like, are they going to play or are they not going to play, right?
Well, Major League Baseball had the first month of the Major League Baseball season was exactly like that. It really was. I've said all along, there were going to be cases. If you're not going to bubble, the entire league, and it's not practical to do that for a 5-month season. NBA and NHL, it's apples to oranges. They were already on the cusp of the postseason when their season was shut down. So it was always going to be challenging to do that. We can certainly talk about the potential to bubble for the postseason, assuming they get to that point in some kind of a smooth fashion. But I've said to you over and over and over, to me, the real failure was trying to think you were going to play 256 games in a normal 17-week schedule. That was the problem right there. You needed to plan to have some of these things happen. Crossing your
An all-star
fingers.
break.
Right. I mean, I said that over and over and over. I mean, instead of now, and I thought it was hilarious that the league puts out the revised schedule during the 1:00 games where all these teams are having their games changed, their bye weeks changed. I mean, it's just organized chaos in a not so good way, not the not not the Rex Ryan way, but I, I continue to look at just what was a missed opportunity to put an open week in the middle of the season. If you have teams that don't have to reschedule any games, then great. Guess what? It's a second bye week, and it's a tip of the cap to player safety. And then you put another week, maybe two if you absolutely have to, at the end of the regular season. And you've now given each team their bye week and at least 2 other weeks as cover in case they have an outbreak. You don't want that, of course. No one has wanted to get the coronavirus. No one has wanted to have someone they love or someone they know die from the coronavirus, but it has happened. So that's not to say that the NFL is going to be spared from that, as far as at
But
least
how do they
players.
manage it? You're
Right.
releasing schedules in the middle of games. I mean, it's
But
been
that's the
wacky.
problem. And here's the thing that people aren't talking about nearly as much as they should be. We've all talked about this through the lens of the virus. What about the fact that we're telling teams, okay, you're not going to play Sunday, your building's shut down, but we're hoping you can play Monday or Tuesday? What about the player safety element of these players not allowed to go into the facility? They're not allowed to practice. They're not allowed to go organize and work out together. We saw that with the Tennessee Titans, right or wrong. That was still a team that was being told they potentially had to play, and they were potentially going to be playing a legit NFL opponent, like a good team, not an 0-16 team or anything like that. So we're so focused on the virus part of it, and I understand that. I'm not saying we shouldn't be focused on that, but what's been lost is the competitive element of this and the normal conversation of player safety. This idea that we're going to have teams not practice the entire week and then just show up a day before the game and say, okay, we're good, we're going to go play. That's lost in all of this as well, and that's something I have a major problem with when you consider the amount of injuries that you see around this league on a normal basis. So that's a
And
variable
after
that.
watching Dak Prescott, who
Sure,
did
and
he
look,
get
that
his
was
contract and
right,
all of
right.
that's going on too,
And
right?
look, I mean, freak things are going to happen like that. I mean, I don't think that play was anything because of, that's something that's going to be prevented by guys practicing. Guys are going to get hurt. But uh, the point I'm making here is, again, we planned for something to try to be normal from a scheduling standpoint, understanding it wasn't normal, understanding that you weren't going to bat 1,000 here. And that should have become abundantly clear when you saw how the first week or the first month of Major League Baseball season worked out. And that's a sport that has smaller rosters and lends itself to social distancing much more than what you have with an NFL locker room with 53 players and 16 guys on the practice squad and other guys that are on injured reserve and guys in the trainer's room. I mean, you have that in baseball. You have some of those elements, but it's on a smaller scale. So we saw what happened with baseball in late July and the month of August, and they did eventually get to the point where it stabilized and they were able to play. And now they're in a mini bubble situation now as you're into the LCS part of the postseason, and it looks like it'll be fine and they'll finish. But this is where the NFL had all this time and they didn't take advantage to the level that they needed to. Their protocols themselves, I don't think those have necessarily been the massive problem here. I don't think having a 16-man practice, I thought that was a good idea. I think some of the flexibility they've created with roster moves was a good idea. But from a scheduling standpoint, that's where they really dropped the ball here and needed to give themselves some cover. Either you make it a 14-game schedule or you keep it a 16-game schedule. You throw that open week in the middle of the season, treat it like the All-Star break. You throw an open week or two in at the end of the season, which we're going to end up seeing. I mean, they did all this schedule adjusting, and all it's going to take is one more team having maybe not a Titans-like level outbreak, but another team having
You
some
know what they
positive
should do,
tests.
dude? They should give everybody Thanksgiving weekend off, but that's exactly the weekend they're going to want to play.
Sure. I mean, and look, I mean, Thanksgiving week, whatever the week is, it should have been,
Well, I'm
there
just
should have
saying,
been an open
everybody's at
week.
home that they're not.
Sure.
They should just take a breather there and
Yeah.
say, you know what? Take a week off. We'll come back the first week of December. We'll move the Super Bowl back 2 or 3 weeks. Move the Super
Yeah.
Bowl back to March. I mean, whatever they need, they could extend the season that way.
Well,
I don't.
and what you're going to end up seeing is they're going to end up having a week 18, if not a week 19. And that's what's going to happen. And at the end of the day, that'll end up being fine, I suppose. But if you had that kind of thinking from Jump Street, you wouldn't have had these issues where you're trying to rearrange bye weeks and you're canceling games and postponing games and flipping games on the schedule. And now teams that were planning from an advanced scouting standpoint, now they're preparing for another opponent a little bit more quickly than they anticipated. And I'll continue to come back to that player safety element beyond the virus, which is clearly clearly the driving force to all of this and in making these adjustments. But where you're shutting down facilities and guys aren't able to work out and practice and congregate and work on the actual football part of it, and then they get the all clear and they're expected to play a game in a day or two. I mean, look, I don't have necessarily a lot of sympathy for the Tennessee Titans if in fact they violated protocols to the degree that people have discussed, but we also know that you can follow protocols and still get the virus. We've seen that widespread as a country. So I still look at that and then I say, well, we're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole here with trying to play these games and saying, okay, well, this Thursday game is going to go to Sunday, or this Sunday game is now going to be played on Tuesday. Meanwhile, these players are sitting at home isolating and they can't work on their craft. And guess what? These wins and losses are still going to matter when it comes to coaches' jobs, when it comes to players and their salaries. So there's not just the competitive element, but there's a financial security element to this. There's a player safety element to this beyond just the virus, because we know that football teams need to practice and they need to go in and get treatment and things of that nature.
Well,
So
it's funny because this gets brought up by all of them, right? The agents
yeah,
and the players are fighting in one direction. The lawyers are fighting in another. The coaches are fighting in another. And the owners just want to get paid and get the games in.
yeah, I mean, but that's where we just needed to.
And the TV networks are saying, don't take a bye week Thanksgiving. We need ratings. We need sponsors. But this is America. This is where, and it's all about the cash grab. It's all about the money in the middle. And how can we get to it and secure it safely and efficiently and quickly and as much of it as possible?
And that's again where this could have many of the issues they've dealt with could have easily been avoided if you give teams a second bye week, or you play the first 7 weeks of the season and then week 8 is an open week. No one's going to play other than any teams that had a postponement in the first 7 weeks of the season. And then if you have something like the Titans where potentially you're talking about multiple games being postponed, then you maybe get into a scenario where you say, all right, we'll see what happens by season's end. If you are 4-11, you're not going to play your 16th game because there's just no reason for you to play that. And we make enough money, we generate enough revenue as a league that we will make you whole. From a players and coaches, those guys getting paid. That's what you could have done. You have that open week, and then you have an open week or two at the very end of the season, and you're not feeling near the amount of pressure in terms of, okay, let's move this game to Monday, or let's move this game to Tuesday. We can't play Tuesday, so we need to move this to the following week, and now we're going to mess up 5 other teams' schedules. And that's just, that's from a competitive standpoint and from a player safety standpoint, going beyond just the virus part of this. That's problematic, and it could have been avoided had the league just looked at this from a realistic standpoint. In the same way that they expanded practice squads and they changed all these roster rules, they should have said, we can still play a 16-game season, but trying to do that in 17 weeks in normal circumstances, probably not going to happen. Let's give ourselves a couple extra weeks. We'll start the playoffs in mid-January rather than the beginning of January. And guess what? That idea that's been talked about with the Super Bowl being played President's Day weekend, that's been talked about a number of years. We can do that. And they would have been
Well,
fine
to
that.
me, they're going to
Let me
move the
rephrase that.
Super Bowl to
Better chance of
LA,
being
or they're
fine.
going to move it to Vegas this year because Tampa can't even have people. They're going to have to give Tampa another Super Bowl for like real, for like people like us to fly down there and spend nights in hotels when none of that's going to happen this year, obviously, right? So to me, they're going to stage the thing in the same way Major League Baseball staged a World Series or is about to.
It's possible, yeah.
To me, that's going to have to happen for Tampa because Tampa's made this incredible investment in the Super Bowl that nobody's going to come for, and they're going to move it back weeks. They're going to do all of that. They're going to have to do all of that because I promise you one thing. Look, I don't know who's going to win the election. I know who I want to win the election. I'm going to tell everybody to vote because that's what I do. Let me get my ballot out because I yell about it here. Please vote, everyone. But the virus isn't voting red. It's not voting blue. It's not voting purple. It's not voting for Roger or against Roger or for Jerry or against Bisciotti. The virus is here, and it's going to get worse. There's just no doubt about that. Every scientist in the world has said that from the beginning, that it's about to come back and come roaring back. And whenever that happens, to your point, everything you just said about football and scheduling and, whether the Jets stink and whether they should even just go home and not even bother playing anymore, or who's going to be around at the end of the year, the virus is going to come back. And to your point, if they're not really thinking about that and they're putting duct tape and fly swatting and taking 6 teams in the middle of games on Sunday and just moving everything around unilaterally, it's the beginning of many, many unilateral moves they're about to make because they are going to make some moves. And you'll come back to this, and when the Super Bowl's not in Tampa and they put it somewhere else, you'll say, hey, Ness talked about that back in October because that's just where this is going to be because the virus isn't going to go away and we're just going to get the games in. That's not going to happen.
Well, I mean, I think they can get the games in, but it needs to be done with an expectation that you're probably going to have to adjust. They've already had to adjust.
It's going to be on the virus's schedule, the way Fauci said, not on theirs.
Well, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we just don't. So that's where the league needed to provide more cover, and that's what they'll need to continue to do. And it might be a case where, heck, they might say they'll play the first round, they'll play the wild card round of the playoffs, and then come divisional round, those teams might all go to Los Angeles with this new kind of, this new stadium they have and set up where, I mean, NFL Network's going to have their offices and all of that there. That might be the kind of setup where they could quarantine 8 teams and play and handle it that way. Your divisional round and just play the divisional round, the conference championships, and the Super Bowl there. That might be what ultimately happens. I don't know. I can't see that far into the future. I'm not going to pretend to.
But it's not going to be normal. That's the notion that we're just going to gather in January in the cold and play football games in Kansas City and Baltimore and everything's all the trains are going to run on time. They better have not plan B and plan C and plan D. They better have plan R, S, T, U, and V, literally, if they want to get this in. Because if you look at what the NBA and the NHL did to get their thing in and with how many 7-inning games and doubleheaders and put a guy on second base baseball did to get these games in, football's been trying to do this really, really normal, and everything was it's not going to be normal.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point. And, I mean, but I also know 4 or 5 months ago, many people didn't think they were going to play at all. And, I mean, they've been able to play. They've had problems, but it's not as though half the games in the league have been postponed or it's been an absolute disaster either. There needs to be some acknowledgement that this wasn't going to go perfectly to plan, and you need to have flexibility to adjust. They didn't give themselves enough cover, but they've adjusted now. They've rearranged the schedules. You hope, and I think it's going to. I don't think it's even going to be an issue of hoping. I think it's going to be inevitable that we're going to have a week 18, if not a week 19, where you're going to have some games that are made up at the end of the season. And it is what it is from a competitive balance standpoint. We talked about it with baseball. You're going to have some teams that are they're going to get screwed over. I mean, The 2008 Ravens got screwed over by a hurricane in week 2 in Houston. And their bye week was week 2, and it was 2 days. I mean, think about that. And they got to the AFC Championship. So it's not as though it's impossible to overcome. It's just an acknowledgement of this isn't going to be ideal and normal. I think it can be pulled off, but a lack of flexibility built into the schedule was definitely a misfire by the league. There's no question about that.
We will be talking all week about the Falcons' rudderless ship and Dak Prescott and COVID and the schedule and the Philadelphia Eagles. Luke will be out at Owings Mills all week long, bringing you full coverage, including on our WNST tech service, all brought to you by our friends at Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Big thanks to all of our sponsors. Shout-outs to Full Circle Tire and Auto and Dave up in Harford County. You can find him up there at 410-676-CARS. And make sure you like them out on the Facebook thing, Full Circle Tire and Auto. I wear the shirt around here as well as the hat for Sporticulture. I don't have it on right now, but I do have the purple magma lamp here. The Ravens are 4-1 under the purple magma lamp, so things are going well there. They're a click away at Sporticulture, and the fantastic, beautiful flowers they will deliver, seasonal and beautiful as well, at sporticulture.com. Don't forget Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. I did not tweet early in the game because my wife brought me home chicken and it was delicious and it was on my fingertips, and my fingertips and Royal Farms chicken do not do well with the glass on my keyboard on my phone or on my laptop. So Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. Eat it. I had it during the tailgate, and I was working so much on the new Baltimore Positive that I didn't start eating until the game began. So make sure that when you get your chicken, you're eating it during the tailgate portion, not when the game actually begins like I did on Sunday. But as it turned out, things went well, and Luke is the best tweeter anyway. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Luke at WNST.net finds him. Together, we are at Baltimore Positive as we have merged WNST.net AM 1570 Towson, Baltimore, with my pet project along with Don Moeller at Baltimore Positive. I think you'll like what you see.